So let's talk about something huge happening in India right now. It's this massive educational experiment, a plan to build 50,000 high-tech labs in schools. And the goal here? To completely change how a whole new generation learns, thinks, and innovates.
It all really kicks off with this big fundamental question. You've got millions of students graduating in India every year, right? But for some reason, there's this huge gap, this disconnect between what they learn in school and the skills that modern jobs are actually demanding. And if you look at recent reports, like the 2024 India Unemployment Report, they really hit the nail on the head. The problem is a system that's been focused on, well, rote learning, just memorizing facts for an exam. And that's created a major skills gap. And look, this is way bigger than just getting a job. We're talking about getting an entire generation ready for the crazy fast changes of the fourth industrial revolution.
So, what's the answer to this massive challenge? Well, the Indian government has come out with a plan that is just huge. It's a direct shot at changing the very foundation of how kids learn in school.
And here's the magic number. 50,000. That's how many new high-tech labs they're planning to set up in government schools over just the next 5 years. Now, to give you some perspective, there are already 10,000 of these labs, so we're talking about a 5-fold increase. That is a massive jump. Okay, so what are these labs anyway? What actually goes on inside them, and what makes them so different from your typical classroom?
Well, an Atal Tinkering Lab, or ATL for short, is really less of a classroom and more like a creative workshop, maybe an inventor's garage. It's a space where students, from 6th all the way to 12th grade, can literally get their hands dirty, play around with ideas, and learn by doing, by actually building stuff.
Yeah, and you can just forget about the old-school science lab with Bunsen burners and beakers. In these places, students are working with 3D printers, robotics kits, Internet of Things devices, you name it. They're getting the actual tools they need to build and prototype their own inventions. It takes learning way, way beyond the textbook.
And this right here, this is really the core of the whole mission. It's not just about teaching a kid how to code or how to operate a 3D printer. The real goal, the bigger picture, is to spark curiosity, creativity, to build a completely new way of thinking. They call it a design mindset, which is something you can use to solve pretty much any problem in any field you can imagine. Now, it's super important to understand that these labs aren't just some random standalone project. Nope, they're actually the first critical step in a much bigger national strategy. The idea is to build an entire pipeline for innovation, right from the ground up. So this whole thing, the Atal Innovation Mission, or AIM, actually kicked off way back in 2016, and by 2025, they had already set up 10,000 labs, which is amazing, reaching over 11 million students. So this new plan to add another 40,000 labs on top of that, well, it's a huge acceleration of that original vision.
So you can start to see how the whole pipeline is meant to work, right? It starts with the ATLs in schools, just sparking that initial curiosity. Then, if an idea shows promise, it can move up to an Atal incubation center at a university, where it gets nurtured into a real startup. And the final step? Those startups feed into a whole national ecosystem of entrepreneurship, creating new businesses and, of course, new jobs.
But, okay, let's get real for a second. An idea this big, this ambitious, of course it's going to have some enormous challenges. I mean, jumping from 10,000 labs to 50,000 isn't just about throwing money at the problem. It brings up some really significant on-the-ground hurdles that have to be dealt with.
Really, the success of this whole thing depends on solving a whole web of problems that are all tangled together. For one, the program's reach is still pretty limited in a lot of states. Then you've got a major shortage of trained teachers and mentors, and existing teachers are already overworked as it is. And that's before you even get to the practical stuff, like infrastructure, language barriers, and the big one, how do you make sure these labs are still running 5-10 years from now after the initial funding is gone?
Just to give you a sense of how big that limited reach problem is, let's just zoom in on one state, Rajasthan. Get this, out of almost 71,000 schools, only 400 have an ATL. 400. That's less than 1%.
So when we talk about scaling up, closing that kind of gap is the monumental task they're facing.
And it's not just about the physical space or the fancy equipment. It's about people, the human side of it. Right now, for the 10,000 labs that exist, there are only about 6,200 volunteer mentors of change. Think about that ratio. That's already stretched thin when you're trying to mentor 11 million kids. It shows just how much this whole thing relies on a volunteer army that needs to grow, like exponentially.
Okay, so faced with all these massive challenges, how are they actually planning to pull this off? What's the game plan?
Well, the strategy is actually pretty smart and pragmatic. Instead of trying to put a lab in every single school all at once, they're starting by prioritizing schools that already have good infrastructure. Think of model schools like the PM Shri schools, which are basically set up to be perfect examples of the new national education policy. The idea is that these well-equipped schools can then act as hubs for all the other schools in the area.
And a really huge piece of the puzzle here is teamwork, specifically through what are called public-private partnerships, or PPPs. Basically, this model gets corporations and private foundations to team up with the government. They can help fund the labs, build them, and even help run them, which brings in not just cash, but a ton of expertise, too.
And to make it even easier for partners to jump on board, they've come up with a couple of flexible funding models. There's a standard model for 20 lakhs per lab, and then a more nimble, agile model for 10 lakhs. Having these different options is a smart way to attract all kinds of partners, big and small, and hopefully speed the whole rollout up.
And in the end, everything we've talked about, it all ties back to India's big 2020 national education policy. The main goal is exactly the same: to get the education system to move away from just memorizing facts and move towards genuine understanding. It's about teaching students how to learn for themselves.
So, this incredible, massive educational experiment is kicking into high gear. Now, success is absolutely not guaranteed, and we've seen the challenges are very, very real. But if it works, if they can pull this off, this whole push to get kids tinkering in classrooms could completely redefine what education looks like and truly build the innovative India of